and I know that others will be joining as they find themselves able. But hello, everyone. I'm Lane Carr. I'm the Director of Accountability, and we'll be facilitating this conversation today. The Commissioner sends his regards. He is on a well-deserved break right now. So we're joined today by several people who are going to be sharing some important updates about Launch Nebraska. And as you all know, or should know, the Commissioner and Governor spoke a week ago from today and said some really important things, and we're going to add to that conversation. So once again, thank you for joining. We have others that are continuing to pop on here, and we'll just keep rolling through. So the first thing that I wanted to share is, the Commissioner and Governor spoke last week about the commitment for our schools to be back in session in the fall. And what we know is that that's going to look a little bit different for every school district. So we want to just share with you expand upon what the governor and the commissioner said by sharing just a couple of these guiding principles around our return to school. So these 5 pieces are really going to underlie and have underlined the work that we've done with Launch Nebraska and will continue to put out. So ensuring that we're transparent with you and sharing what we do and don't know. Ensuring that we're putting all learners at the center, and specifically those who have been historically marginalized. We want to make sure we're listening to all stakeholders across the board, from our public health to our rural schools to our in-between size schools and then our largest schools, to try to create the best case scenarios for our students as we return. We also have to put safety first, and we're leveraging science, data, and our public health partnerships to make that happen. And the last piece is we're going to be decisive. So we'll be very honest with you on the things that we're going to be making the decisions on. And then we also expect and ask that you, using all the information guidance that we provide, can also do the same. To expand upon that just a little bit more, we know that schools will be in session in the fall. We're going to share a little bit with Dr. Vargas and Dr. Corey Epler later on about how this might look different and the things that you should be considering a little bit differently. We also know that we have 244 districts that are in 244 different places. So one size just cannot fit all. We know that we're going to have to be flexible, and we know that we're going to have to do some things differently than what we've ever done. I'm really excited that Dr. Joel from LPS could join us today to share a little bit about a model really for what the rest of the state could look like as far as protocols that really match a district risk assessment. So I'll kind of leave it at that as Dr. Joel then will transition here. And then for us, the flexibility and preparation are going to be absolutely key. So that's just kind of a brief little bit of context in 3 minutes, because I want to really spend the time with our panelists who have the expertise here. So the next item on our agenda will be to go to Dr. Joel. And Dr. Joel, I would love for this to just be a conversation if you would share just a little bit about your process. Talk to us about the release and how you engaged with communities and families throughout this process. Thanks again for joining us.
You're welcome, Lane. And not sadly, I'm looking forward to it. We have a school board retreat. I'm going to have to depart fairly early. It starts at 5 o'clock. I see Pat Lopez is on the call as well, too. And I can just tell you that we have just enjoyed a wonderful relationship with the Lincoln-Lancaster County Health Department. We've been in pretty deep conversations for quite a while, probably a month in terms of being able to develop what we think is going to be a pretty good strategy. And we also know that our strategies are going to be subject to the winds of change. The information gets changed on a pretty regular basis. And we all experienced that last week when the governor significantly loosened restrictions, and we weren't expecting that. So if you've been following LPS at all, you know that we got caught in kind of a wind tunnel on graduation. We had just decided to do a virtual graduation, had made plans, and right after we announced it, loosening of restrictions just pretty much got people in Lincoln all fired up. Why are we not doing it physically? Which always presents other sides of the problem too. We are well aware that there's a lot of concern on the part of our parents. I was just notified that in social media. There's a group that is putting itself together to come to the board meeting tomorrow night, because we're going to be seeking a resolution from the board that basically endorses the fact that we're going to be following the COVID risk dial, and we're going to be working with LLHCD with the idea that we're going to have school, and we're going to practice face coverings, social distancing, and all of those things that go into that. None of this is easy work. And, again, I think our health department is being very open-minded to the fact that we have to have school. I think the vast majority of our parents on a survey recently said they want school. And we got about 6% of our parents that said they're not coming to school until there's a vaccine. And they really don't like remote learning. So it's going to be interesting to see, how they reconcile that in their own families. So the COVID risk dial is really our guide. And, there's 4 colors to it. And what we've determined, and again, the devil's in the details. And I was on a call for just a little bit with the LLHCD. We were talking about outdoor activities and even indoor activities and things like lockers and water fountains and high use areas. There's just a lot of things that have to be worked on, but I feel like we're making progress. We came out right after we had a conversation with Pat and her team. This is probably a couple of weeks ago. We came out and we said, it's going to be our intent to have school for 100% of the students, which means kindergarten or pre-K through 12. And we feel pretty confident today with where we are numbers wise that we're going to be able to do that. We feel real confident that we're going to be okay K-5 and 6 through 8 as long as we don't get up into the upper orange. Red, red is pretty much game over, schools closed, get back to remote learning. But we feel like we might be moving toward that green, which is really, the best color to have during the pandemic. But our schools are big, as a lot of school districts across the state have more kids in it than they're set up for capacity wise. But we feel like, again, if we're taking good care with face coverings and with social distancing and sanitizing and hand sanitizer for students and honestly, and this is where the work's going to be is wiping down those surfaces as much as possible. I feel like we'll probably, unless there's a surprise here, we'll probably be pretty good to go. It's not going to look it's not going to look like parents want it to look. Again, I think we're going to get some significant pushback now on face coverings. There just seems to be in our city, and I think across the country too, it was modeled in Tulsa over the weekend, right, by our national leaders, that this whole thing is overblown. We don't believe that to be the case, and we believe that when the board supports this resolution, we'll be able to come out and say, if you're not going to wear face coverings, and that would mean adults as well as students, then we're going to figure out, how you're going to participate remotely. So that's kind of where we are. And I think, again, the devil's in the details because, we're getting questions all the time. When does football practice start? What can we expect for a schedule? What about gym class? We've talked a lot about music. We have Dr. Lance Nielsen is very, very nationally networked in music. Many of you probably know who he is. And, they're working on a protocol for music. I think music's going to look quite a bit different as we know that, the virus can change through people projecting their voices. And then, art, we in elementary and middle school will probably be keeping kids in cohorts, and then we'll be bringing those electives to them. Physical education is an area that, we're still trying to work through a little bit, but, I feel for the most part, we've got a good plan, but honestly, I would say this to any superintendent that's on the call, and for NDE purposes as well too. I mean, we are heading into a time period where, as hard as we're working and as much cooperation and collaboration as we have across the state, starting with Department of Ed, this whole issue of the response to the pandemic is becoming overly politicized. And, we have people, I'll give you an example. Tuesday night, Pat, you don't even know this, but the Nebraska Medical Association unknown to me, just sent a letter endorsing face coverings. And we're also expecting about 110 local physicians on Tuesday that will have signed a petition saying, they fully support school as long as we're enforcing face coverings. And yet, there are doctors that would say, I don't think that that's accurate, and we don't see the need for that. So, it would have been, talk about the politics of it, right? When the governor basically came out and he said that funds would be withheld for cities and counties, and I think it's more counties than cities, if face coverings are mandated for the public, that sent a shrill down everybody's spine here in Lincoln, because then the first question was, and fortunately, Dr. Bloomstead answered his text immediately, that doesn't include NDE dollars. So that's a separate pile of money, which created a sense of relief. But from the political standpoint, it doesn't do us any, that just didn't do us any good, because, if there are an awful lot of people that would say, if we don't have to wear it in the county, then this is what the governor's saying, then why do we have to wear it in schools too? And how are we going to have students, kindergarten through third or fifth grade, wearing masks? We think we're going to have a large number of parents that are going to take us on that. But I'm very, very fortunate and happy that we have quite a bit of summer left for us to begin taking on these kind of hot issues, because it won't be long that we'll be opening up school. And, as many of you do as well, as we look at what's happening in Asia and Europe and down in South America, and even across the country with the 4 states and 5 states that have had dramatic increases in infections, we're real nervous going forward that, we will have cases. We had 4 students, baseball players at one of our high schools that tested positive. We've had a number of staff members test positive. We're going to be hearing more and more about that. But I do think that our plan with with the Lancaster Health Department is such that we shouldn't have to consider closing school district as much as taking care of outbreaks when they do occur, whether it's a classroom or a building or grade level. And so again, I feel like we're probably in the best position we can be going forward, but a lot of this is going to be driven by the public. And right now, the public is tired of being cooped up. They're fired up about a whole bunch of issues, not the least of which is, the pandemic and the looming election that's coming up in November. And I was joking with Dr. Bloomstead. I said, we need something like a tornado just to kind of take the edge off around here, because we're hearing from lots of different people. I'll stop there, and if there's any, I got about 10 more minutes if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Joel, for that perspective, and for grounding all of your decisions in the public health and safety of your students. I'm wondering if you can just briefly talk about, I know that the engagement survey that you sent out to your families and parents, could you talk a little bit about that? Yeah. And then the second thing that I would love for you to just briefly touch on is, I'm hearing a lot of the preparation that you're doing and preparing for all cases and scenarios. Can you get into that just a little bit, and what some of that preparation for your teachers and staff look like?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll start with the staff survey, the staff survey parent survey that we sent out a couple of weeks ago. We got a great return on it. I think we had 14,000 responses. And, a large percentage of our parents really want school. It was pretty clear. And, they'd really like it without any restrictions. But then we gave them a couple of different scenarios. If in fact we have to limit numbers, what would you prefer? This is primarily, I think, middle school and high school. And our parents prefer the everyday, half a day option. I think it was like 62%. So we're, unlike some of the other districts that are looking at the A-B schedule, 2 days this week, 3 days next week, we're going to be trying to work on some plans that we can, in the event that we have to do that, that we'll be able to go forward. We put a staff survey out yesterday. Dr. Weber shared with me this morning that we've got close to 50% of our faculty have already responded. So I think that tells you the sense of urgency on people's minds. And really what we're trying to get a handle on is, assuming school is occurring, what concerns do you have, and do you have any of those underlying health conditions or exemptions that would cause you to not be able to work? And, you know, one of them is access to childcare. If in fact we go to some kind of an alternative schedule. I haven't seen any of the results on that yet, so I think that's going to be guiding. Quite a bit of concern on the part of our teachers with regard to safety. You know, will these classrooms be safe? And I've got a teacher advisory council, about 70 teachers I'm going to be meeting with, I think on Wednesday or Thursday this week. And we're going to really give them the opportunity to ask us questions. And we're going to compile a database of those things that teachers are thinking about, that they're on social media talking about, that, you know, quite frankly, we haven't gotten to that level of depth in terms of detailing that out. So now the work really is, we've made the commitment to go to school. The work now is, what about, you know, what about all the ancillary concerns that you have with a building? How do you arrive? How do you depart? At, you know, Lincoln East High School right now is 2,400 students. And if we go 100% of those students, that's going to be, they're going to be tough. So we're looking at kind of jagged or staggered bell schedule. We're looking at one-way traffic in a large high school. All of our high secondary principals are looking at that as an option to try to minimize, you know, too many kids at the same time. And, you know, we're going to use our cafeterias. We feel like we have to, in order to be able to clean those twice a day, 3 times a day in our classrooms. We're going to keep kids in cohorts. And so the minutia again is in the details. And, you know, as you can imagine, everybody in LPS right now is really working overtime to try to come up with the best possible scenario for that. And again, Pat Lopez and her team have just been instrumental, because we're getting into conversations, and then we're having a meeting with them in which, you know, they're giving us some pretty detailed guidance on that. So Lane, I don't know if that gets to your question.
It does. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Joel. And thanks again for sharing that. That's actually a great transition into Pat. And Pat Lopez is the director of the Lancaster County Public Health District. Pat, thank you first for your leadership in this time, not only for our region here in Lincoln, Lancaster County, but also for statewide. You've provided us a lot of support. So I just wanted to publicly thank you for all of that. I'm wondering if you could talk just a little bit about, from your perspective, you know, working with Dr. Joel, working with his team, what does that look like? And then if you would and could, if you could get into kind of this tough question around the recommendation around masks and who should wear them, when should students wear them, etc. So thanks again for joining us, Pat. Oh, Pat, you're muted here. There we go.
Thank you for having me today. I'll try and answer that. The questions about masks continues on, and there's a lot of different thoughts on that process. So I'll definitely talk about that. We've been working with, before the schools were closed, we had actually met with our schools in Lincoln, and actually had been working with Dr. Joel for some time before that, and working with our health systems and pulling everybody together to talk about what is this going to look like, and what might we be facing here. So we brought in all of the health staff from all our rural, public, and parochial schools to talk about what we need to do for students. So that was prior to school closing. So we've had that relationship and kind of working together. And of course, all our local health departments do surveillance with their schools. So they have a long-standing relationship in working with them around communicable disease and other health-related prevention activities. So with this part, when we started looking at what are we going to do into the future, how is this going to look when we start to talk about going back to school, and are we going back to school? So we just sat down and started having a basic discussion, not only with Lincoln Public Schools, but also our rural and parochial and private schools here in Lancaster County, And then we meet twice a week with Dr. Joel's team and address specific areas, kind of outline an agenda. And as he mentioned, like today, there was a discussion on custodial activities. But we've also been talking about what are we going to do when we have the first case in school, because we will have a case in school. What if it's a student? What if it's a faculty person? What if it's somebody in the administrative team? And working through that process, and we're continuing to do that. And another thing at the same time, we've been sharing, we have the COVID risk dial in Lancaster County. So we started looking at that as a way to look around when you heard there's so many things about phases and other activities. But where we thought that the risk dial, we've written guidance for businesses, we've written guidance for individuals on what they can do for themselves, both in public and at home. And the same with businesses about how they conduct business and what that should look like during certain periods of time. And the risk dial is based on looking at the number of new COVID cases in the community. It's not just based on one thing. It's not just based on cases. It's based on our overall positivity rate. It's looking at, do we have the testing capacity that we need in the community if people are ill? Do we have the health system capacity? Can we take care of people in the hospital? Are we able to do contact tracing within a specified 24-hour period of time to kind of mitigate the disease? And what is our local testing, availability? So there's a lot of things that go into the dial, and look at trying to help us in making some rational decisions. And a lot of it is quantitative. Most of it is all based on quantitative data. We looked at the Open Up America document, the Bloomberg document, and CDC. So all of this guidance kind of combined as how we work through the development of the dial and then the recommendations that we make for use. So we've been working through that with Lincoln Public Schools, as I said, and decided to work at adapting the dial. And as we kept meeting and working further, we thought, in looking at where we are and knowing that we have to learn to live with this virus to a certain extent, and knowing that schools have experience working with children with infectious diseases, how can we do the best possible thing from a health reduction risk, from a public health prevention standpoint, and actually get the schools open? We want children to be in the classroom. We want them to be learning. We want them to have a sense of normalcy, but how do we do that so it's safe for them, safe for their educators that are working with them, and how can we minimize that so we can keep the children in school and not have to close school again because we have such a high rate of infection. So then we came to that point of saying we should have school open 100% of the time unless we're in the red area. And in the red area, everybody would be, that's when we would go back to probably really encouraging people who could telework to telework and those kind of things. So, so basically that's where we're at. And Dr. Joel mentioned, we keep working through details. Like, he mentioned the water fountains. We've been working on what does it look like when students arrive at school? What does it look like when they leave? What should we do with specials? How do we mitigate in junior high and high school moving around? And in looking at the mask, that's something that our physicians in Lincoln, our infectious disease and our pulmonologists have really encouraged. And in the research we've done, we know that if I wear a mask and you wear a mask, the rate of transmission is low. And I think sometimes this doesn't come up often, but think about all of our healthcare providers that are at the hospital setting taking care of patients who have COVID. They're using protective equipment, their masks, they're taking care of themselves. They're not developing COVID. And so one of the things is thinking about in terms of how do we do that. And yes, it'll be challenging, but if we have students in a classroom that are wearing a mask and an educator and those coming in, and somebody does become positive, or when they do, everybody can stay in school and we can just monitor them. Whereas it's possible if we have students in a classroom and nobody's wearing a mask and somebody becomes positive, the exposure rate is much greater and we may have to quarantine those students. So we're looking at this in terms of how can we minimize that. And having said all of that, I think, you know, the health directors are working on a core set of principles that we are looking at across the whole state. So we have continuity in what we're proposing to schools and working with them on. Many of the health departments have adopted the risk dial and they're using that in their communities as a guide. And just because we recommend something in one area, that doesn't mean that every school is going to be doing that. You know, the number of cases, you all know, because you're across the state, there are counties that have actually no cases, you know, so they would be in the green zone. I mean, they're going to have business as usual. And then on top of it, I think Dr. Joel gave it the great example of last Monday, Lincoln Public Schools thought they were doing something Monday evening for graduation, and that all changed Tuesday morning. So we're still, almost not 8 weeks out, maybe 7 weeks before Lincoln Public Schools starts. We see changes every week. So we just have to keep that in mind. We're developing the best plans based on the information and the experience we're having now. I don't know, Lane, if that helps.
That is really helpful, Pat. And just again, thank you. I think, you know, what I feel like I heard you said and have heard from other conversations with public health folks in our state, as well as DHHS, UNMC, partners that are working across the nation, is that masks are a best case scenario. If you can wear a mask, right? But again, knowing that that might change based on which level of risk that you are in. So just really thank you for that, and thinking about the different nuances of the risk dial and how it will look different in every school and every district. So with that, thank you, Pat, again, for your leadership. We're actually going to transition now to speaking. We've seen a couple of questions kind of come in around this cooperative purchasing. And so we have with us Corey Dahl, who's the administrator for ESU 8. Corey, we're thankful that you would be here, and just again, thankful for the partnerships with ESUs. And I'm wondering if you can kind of just give us an update from your perspective.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Lane. Yes, regarding the hand sanitizer, and of course, I'm talking about that free hand sanitizer from UNL. I have talked with Hunter Floodman, one of the people really heading this. There are many people involved, but he said that they've made approximately 120,000 gallons at this point, and about 17,000 of those gallons have been sent to ESUs, and then we have distributed those to schools throughout the state. And they're expecting up to about 60,000 gallons to be delivered to our schools. A big shout out to UNL for supporting that project, and the Nebraska ethanol industry, and all those companies that support the ethanol industry for supplying those ingredients and the raw materials for this project free of charge. Specifically, Hunter said Green Plains, a Nebraska-based ethanol company, they have supplied the vast majority of those active ingredients used to produce the hand sanitizer. In addition, thanks to all the ESUs from across the state for what they've done to assist in getting those delivered to our schools and coordinating in this effort. Now, the second thing, we've talked a lot about masks today. So the masks, when I say we, the ESU Coordinating Council, We've met several times. We've talked a lot about masks. And what I can tell you at this point is that we have placed an order for masks for students and adults in our schools. These are adult masks, though, at this point, and they're cloth. And from the discussion I've gathered, they said maybe 4th grade and up as far as the size that fits. Of course, there may be some differences there, just depending on the child or the children and their age and how big they are and those sorts of things. But I think the general practice or the thought is 4th grade and up. They come in packages of 5, and I believe, based on the conversations I've heard, that we have asked for more masks than I want to think that the state even has access to. So we're doing our best to get as many as that we can for our schools and our staff and our students. They come in packages of 5. So depending on how many we get, they might have 1 for each day of the week and those sorts of things. So we'll wait and see how many we actually get. The order has been placed, and we're waiting on shipping details. Now, we have talked about child-sized masks, and when I say child-size, we're talking then about that kindergarten through 3rd grade-ish area. None have been ordered at this point for that grade 3 and under, so we still have questions as to how this potential order might look, and how it might take place, and where those funds might come out of, and those sorts of things. So we are in those discussions. So we're doing our best to do what we can to help our schools. And the last thing, we talked about reopening, and you mentioned, Lane, your Launch Nebraska site. That Indy has put out lots of great information there. But one more commercial for the ESUs. We're here to help schools and assist in any way that we can. We're talking about all the safety things, whether it's hand sanitizer or masks, or just the flexibility that you mentioned earlier, Lane, that we all have to have. And we're also having to be very flexible with how we serve our schools. So just let us know how we can help you. I did have a great discussion the other day. I was talking with Alan Ehlers at Madison, and he has teachers coming in, and they're devising plans, just like Lincoln had been talking about. I think everyone's preparing for various scenarios, and I just wanted everyone to know that ESUs are here to help and let us know what we can do. That's all I have for you, Lane, right now, as far as factual stuff.
I have a comment and then a question for you, Corey. First, thanks again for being here today. So yes, very great partnership with ESUs, kind of coordinating that securing and distribution, ultimately the distribution of masks. So we've been working with FEMA as well as the governor's office and DHHS, and they have roughly 2 million cloth masks available. And we asked for, I think, like 2.5 million. So we know that there's going to be more coming in. And then my question to you, Corey, is, if a school is still trying to get a hold of hand sanitizer or things like that, both public and private schools, what should they do to reach out to the ESU?
Yes, I would say yes. I would think that most private schools and parochials, or, and public, everyone knows which ESU they belong to. But yes, reach out to the administrator, reach out to someone at the ESU, because I was literally on the phone this morning and emailing other ESUs. I was talking, we were emailing with ESU 1 and Wakefield, and ESU 7 and Columbus, and we're trying to coordinate the semis that come through, and they're trying to be as effective, cost effective with their delivery. So definitely reach out if you haven't asked for. I believe I speak for most of us, we're trying to get as much as we can, and we'll divvy it out as best that we can. So coordinate with the ESUs, and the ESUs then update we have a Google Doc that we're working with Hunter and those people. And literally just a few minutes ago, I was looking at email, and we're just slightly adjusting the amounts that we're ordering, and just because we want to fill that semi and then get it out to schools. So
awesome.
To answer your question, Lane, reach out to ESUs and do that sooner than later, because they're really on the ball there. And when we say go, they're going to get that hand sanitizer on a truck, and they're going to get it to our area.
Yeah, and I learned all about the ESU marketplace and all of the great work that you have in coordinating some of that bulk purchasing. So thanks a lot for what you're doing. Thanks for joining us again.
You bet.
So the key word today has been all about this planning. So we're going to kind of pivot here to share just a little bit about some updates on Launch Nebraska. We have Dr. Shirley Vargas, who's going to be speaking about leadership and planning, Dr. Zainab Rita, who will talk about the conditions for learning and new resources there, and Dr. Corey Epler, who has some updates on continuity of learning. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Vargas.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to provide some quick updates in relation to leadership and planning from the Launch Nebraska site. And one of the first things I want to underscore is that while the commissioner and the governor both last week mentioned that, you know, schools will be in session, we have to keep in mind that it will look different. I can't continue to underscore that enough, that it will look different across different communities. So as such, we've been talking about what recommendations can be provided for schools and districts to think about this in a really intentional way. And I'm grateful for Dr. Joel to describe what Lincoln Public Schools is doing in partnership with their local health department. So one of the things we've been talking about is the possibility of different scenarios, like scenario planning, and how important it is to keep in mind the variety that might exist when we're thinking about re-entry. And ERS, or Educational Resource Strategies, recently came up with, recently designed 3 different models in which schools can prepare for re-entry. And I think the 2 that we know enough about right now, right? Definitely in person, like everyone coming right back to school, teachers and students, physically in the building. The other is remote, what we just experienced really briefly for the past few months, but really thinking about not just whether or not it's via laptops and the internet, also like whether or not it's printed material with scheduled touch points. The one that takes a lot of planning and iteration and constant conversation with different stakeholders is this hybrid model. The fact that it's possible in which, you know, there'll be a mix of classes happening physically, possibly with prioritized learners, which I know we'll talk further about, and also the possibility of school happening remotely. So thinking about what the scheduling would look like, what staffing would look like, and what materials and professional development will also need to be in place to support that. So I have those 2 resources linked on the PowerPoint here so that you and your teams are able to dig into that and really think about what are the different decision points that will need to be made. And the first link is literally the image you see there. The second link kind of gives you different models for elementary and secondary potential schedules.
Shirley, that's great. Will you quickly talk about the resource that I was most excited to see on the leadership and planning side was the chronic absenteeism. Can you quickly just speak about what that looks like?
So if you go to my next slide, thanks.
Perfect. Thanks.
We didn't plan this, I swear. So what we're seeing here now is also the fact that while we made a quick transition because we were being super responsive to the needs of our communities and the health needs across the state, is also thinking about how we're measuring attendance. And not so much is a child in their seat is a child online, but the way attendance works along with a partner, Future Ed, have really come to think about this is around these 4 different pillars. And in terms of contact, so are we connecting with the student? In terms of connectivity, can we determine whether or not the student and family has access to digital content or devices? Engagement, the sustainability of the relationships between adults and students, and then lastly, participation. So are students taking part in the different learning opportunities? So what's important here is that we have data. Every single school and district has had data up until the point of which the school attendance sites were closed, right? So we can't miss that opportunity of knowing that we have data we can pull from and leverage this opportunity as a way to identify either additional supports that are needed or potentially a new group of students or families that may need additional support from your schools and your community. So it's important to leverage the data that you have to then be able to make those intentional decision points moving forward. So on our Launch Nebraska site, we have the implementation guide for this playbook. The playbook is about 70 pages long. but it has a lot of information that teams can dig into, and the implementation guide's about like 5 pages. So really bringing those two together and meshing them with other teams that you may have already in place. I think, oh, what I will say really quickly, because I know that there was a question that came up, I'm sorry, about the survey. I just want to quickly put a call out. If you already have a survey that you've administered to families, students, or your staff, and would like to share that with us, and then we can then curate just a variety of different surveys that have been distributed across the state. I think that would be a great way for us to elevate the different types of processes our school leaders have been putting out. And I know that Dr. Epler posted an Unbound Ed link, so make sure to check that out. Thank you.
Thanks, Shirley, for sharing that. Yeah, please be sure to check. A lot of these resources have been posted on our Launch Nebraska site, including this next one that Dr. Zainab Rita is going to speak about on the Conditions for Learning page. Zainab?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. So NDE has developed a roadmap for opening schools for Nebraska to navigate the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, with input from public health experts and education leaders at the national, state, and local levels. The framework is developed based on the most up-to-date public health recommendation. And as Lane mentioned earlier, it's really our framework is guided by a principle that we put safety first, and we are centering on equity to make sure that what is the best for all our students, families, educators, especially those most impacted by educational inequity. So as this graphic shows, our plan is part of a continuum of school decision-making. Involve the essential action designed to motivate thinking, planning, and prioritization. And it's really based on the risk dial that really is in great alignment with LPS, as Dr. Joel and Pat just shared. As you look at the first step, shows that to conduct a risk analysis, which is from local health department standpoint, whether the school be open, if it's the transmission the virus transmission remain low. Well, the school close if Nebraska experienced community spread of the virus, or its spread is localized and to very discrete areas. And in this area, it's become, it's really depends on the school and the situation. So it's really, as it shows, like it's a kind of like a green, yellow, orange, and red color. The second step is to identify the appropriate protocols that your school should put in place based on the risk analysis. So the roadmap provides a series of recommendations of how school can approach fall and offers adaptable consideration to meet each community unique needs. We are contracted a national organization called Opportunity Lab, and this team has an epidemiologist who works for CDC and WHO. So they're really working with experts, and we hope release this framework soon. So to share the approaches and on how to make decision how safely operate school in fall 2020. But we are very careful with the process. We want to make sure to get feedback as much as possible from state and local official and from school district as well. So the framework really consists of 3 possible scenarios, as just LPS shows, that with minimal community spread or minimal to moderate local community spread, or there's significant community spread. And under each scenario, so our plan shows that the virus status, it shows how to keep school and community safe, and also you know, the school opening status, whether if it's closed, if it's you know, virtual learning. So then under each scenario, a suggested protocol to develop that include recommendation on mental and social emotional health, recommendation on hygiene, spacing and movement, how to respond to positive tests among staff or students, you know, recommendation on cleaning, busing, and even recommendation for medically vulnerable students and teachers. As you see also, our framework includes supporting consideration documents, really for help with planning, implementing, and there are a lot of additional resources. If you look at these considerations, really I encourage you, we posted those considerations last week on at Lunch Nebraska, and we encourage you to review these supporting considerations. We have brought together diverse stakeholders and experts, including NDE specialists and even LEAs, representative from small and large districts, administrators, teachers, school nurses, counselors, and other. They really understand the reality on the ground and surface solutions. So there, as you look, there are 5 categories, including facilities, mental health, social emotional learning, nutrition, health services, physical activity, and recess. Like for instance, under facilities, their consideration, you know, in the classroom, in the hallway, cafeteria, computer lab, swimming pools, weight rooms, and all and other categories. So, and as you look at the third step, is basically planning work with your return to school committee or to your pandemic response committee to develop your plans. And we understand that there is no one size fits all approach to for your plan. So it's very important that the plan need to differentiate strategies based on school levels and students' needs. Also, the recommendation strategy, as Shirley mentioned, the strategy may look different for urban schools than rural schools, for instance. So differentiation is a very important part of any process, particularly given the range of students and the school served. And the last step is basically review the plan and communicate, work with your local health department and to review your plan and push your thinking. And LPS and Lincoln Lancaster County Health Department really have that great model and beautifully illustrated that. Again, this roadmap, the goal of this roadmap is really to help you make a decision and keep our students safe. So, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lane. Lane, do you want me to cover?
No, that was great, Zainab. Thanks. Your team has been working really tirelessly on this protocol as well as these supporting documents. These documents are posed in the form of a question, really meant to just push your thinking. And you see that supports you around the outside. We did have a question around this review and kind of the protocol. Absolutely. We definitely think you should be working with your local public health district from the get-go, right? From that analyzing the risk to tailoring those plans, making that plan, and then having them ultimately review and stamp as a sign-off. So we think some of these pieces, all of these pieces here can help you do that. I am noticing time here, and we have a lot to cover. So Corey, I'm going to give it over to you, Dr. Corey Epler, to talk a little bit about continuity of learning, some of which has kind of been already discussed. Go ahead, Corey.
Thanks, Lane. I won't take too much time today, but one of the things that I wanted to articulate was we continue to recognize the interconnectedness of each of the different pillars in Launch Nebraska. So as Dr. Vargas talks about some of the staffing and scheduling considerations, there's certainly a direct connection to the instructional side of that. And so the guidance that we're that's in the process of being developed is also planning for 3 scenarios. So an in-person scenario, a hybrid, as well as a remote. We're partnering with a couple national organizations to provide broad guidance around the academic side and instruction piece. That's going to include considerations around core content, but also integration of social emotional learning within the academic content side, as well as additional considerations for assessing students, instruction materials, as well as professional learning. One thing that I wanted to mention, I did send this information to curriculum contacts maybe a couple of weeks ago. So Student Achievement Partners has developed what they're identifying as literacy and mathematics essential content for this coming school year. So it's not prioritizing standards. What they were able to do is to really identify the most critical knowledge that students need in literacy and mathematics by grade level, if and when you're forced to prioritize that particular content. Now, I want to say that this was developed in response to COVID-19. This isn't something certainly that we encourage to happen each school year, but if we expect disruptions throughout the school year, what content might you prioritize as opposed to thinking about prioritizing standards, just simply because of how the standards are built and from a very coherent perspective. So it really takes that into consideration. I'll put the link to that actual document in the chat box as well. We're working on customizing that for Nebraska and to Nebraska standards, and that will be available by July 1 as well. The last thing I'll mention, I know many of you watched our Launch Nebraska webinar series. All 10 of the first webinars are posted. There's 10 free hours of virtual professional learning right there. We have more coming soon. There is a link to a registration for a professional learning opportunity for TSI and ATSI schools. I would encourage you to check out. If you have questions, connect with Dr. Vargas. And then there's also an SEL webinar series coming out hosted by Nebraska MTSS. So the registration for those webinars will also be on that webpage. As you're planning for instruction, feel free to reach out to myself or our content specialist, but I would say keep hanging tight. I think you're going to be pleased with how things will roll out as we approach the end of this month.
Thank you, Dr. Epler. That was concise. Thanks for sharing that. Awesome. Let's move to our final 3 sessions, and I feel bad because we always put these guys at the end, especially Dr. Folkers, with lots of important updates. Dean, let's go to you. Give us some quick updates on the digital learning plans.
So great. So thanks, Lane. Ultimately, the key pieces that we need to let people know about, or to remind you, is that the digital hierarchy of learning needs is still the framework and continues to be the framework around what we're tying CARES and GEARS Act resources that have been targeted for technology supports to close the digital gap. Ultimately, in order for us to get to that place of helping figure out what those gaps are, we've identified or created the digital learning profile and plan. And the target for that digital learning profile and plan, which really is about answering your current and future status of your district and or non-public school. And so the whole purpose of that particular plan, while it serves as a bit of an application for the CARES and GEARS Act resources that are targeted at technology, it's really about laying out what are your specific current situations and needs so that we can match and leverage in the best way possible. So those on the next slide basically is just a reminder that we're targeting July 6th. The sooner the better. If you can get those in earlier, that's even better. The links are on the launchnebraska.com site, but I've also put them in the chat for those that want to get access to those directly. So with that, I'll stop and be succinct in order to yield the rest of my time.
That was great, Dean. Thank you for sharing about that and the quick update, because we know we've gotten some questions about those submissions. So appreciate that and appreciate all your work and your team. Excellent. Let's hear from Brian Halstead now to talk just a little bit briefly about the board's action on Rule 62 and what comes from that.
So good afternoon, everyone. Since we last met 2 weeks ago, the State Board of Education on June 17th entered an order in response to the declaratory petition that was filed by the Educational Service Unit Coordinating Council. The purpose of Rule 62 is to have the ability to ask questions about how laws will apply in the future. That order being entered last week answered questions for the 9 days still left in the 2019-20 school year, and then the beginning of the next school year on July 1st, the 2021 school year. The order itself is on the front page of the NDE website, so you can access it there. You see the two topics listed there, flexibility and guidance. What I would tell you about flexibility is that both the board and the commissioner intend to provide flexibility to the greatest extent possible, provided such flexibility is a benefit to students and any entity asking for it. And finally, the state board made it very clear that it intends to provide that flexibility as permitted by law, but anything that can reasonably be done now or in the future within the parameters of the law should be done by schools, districts, and educational service units. I think the directive we all have is we need to be applying the principles, moving forward as best we can, keeping the students at the forefront of our focus and not thinking as adults what's the simplest solution to our immediate problems. So the order, like I said, is on the front page of the main department webpage. You see my email address. You have further questions, feel free to reach out to me and I'll respond.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that quick update. So Sharon, I recognize we only have 3 minutes. Would you be willing to give us the 3-minute version? And then if there's any follow-up that we need to give, we definitely will. And I'm sorry to shortchange you here on the timing.
Not a problem. I'm hoping that most everyone already has heard something about the pandemic EBT program that was announced last week. Several emails went out. The Families First Coronavirus Act proposes to provide pandemic electronic benefit transfer benefits to SNAP and non-SNAP households that have children with free or reduced, that are eligible for free or reduced meals. And the benefits are there, will be automatically put on for any household that is currently a SNAP participant. The benefits will automatically be placed on their EBT card. Those families that are not SNAP benefits, do not receive SNAP benefits, must apply through the Department of Health and Human Services application site. I'll have to get the website for you, but it was in the email also. The application opened up today, June 22nd, and it's available through the 19th. And so we've shared eligibility information with the Department of Health and Human Services, and hopefully that benefit transfer will be relatively seamless and the application process relatively easy. So we're asking everyone to send schools, asking them to send out information to those families with children that are eligible for free and reduced meals so that they're aware of the program and can apply.
Super concise. Thank you for that. Sharon, if we want more information, is there a site on your page on NDE's website?
There is not yet. I will get one up, and I'll also get the email, the application in the address in the chat box.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Excellent. All right, so just to kind of wrap us up, thank you all for hanging with us this whole time. And with 1 minute to spare, just want to share a couple of last minute comments. If, as questions are rolling in, please do send them to me or to Zane and Brita or any of the panelists that you heard today about the specifics. I want to acknowledge a couple of the questions that we saw in the chat box that didn't get to around face shields or face guards rather than a mask or a face covering. There were a couple of questions, lots to be kind of unearthed around instructional time and attendance. Those are things that we're working on as well. Just keep checking back to the Launch Nebraska site. You're going to see some guidance being put up soon about band, choir, and music this summer that I think is a good foreshadowing of what's to come. Always feel free to reach out and contact any of us. And with that, I will go ahead and stop. So thank you to our panelists and thank you to all for joining. Thanks, everyone.